Hi, and welcome to Parenting on Empty. We really do appreciate that you chose to give us a listen.
So today we were thinking that we would talk about how to teach your child to be independent and what levels of independence we should be nurturing at what ages, what the development of that would look like. I was sitting in a class at our church recently, and the teacher was saying that as we look at our kids, when they're first born, they are 0% independent. They're completely dependent on us. We have to do everything for them. But we're constantly working in training them to become more independent. So we potty train them and we train them how to feed themselves. That's always our goal. And he was saying that, okay, if they are 0% independent at birth, then you look at when you think they will be leaving home, 18 or 19, and that's when they should be pretty close to 100% independent. So then you figure out in between, well, if 18 or 19 is the 100% independent time, then half of that, 9 or 10, should be about 50% independent. And I hadn't really ever thought of it specifically that way, but I thought that's kind of a helpful way to look at the whole process and kind of to analyze each of the things that you ask your kids to do. How much do you do for them? How much do you ask them to do for themselves? And it just gave me a bit of a handle to begin to analyze our behavior and our standards in our home.
Another thing to consider is the fact that that independence is going to happen, whether you orchestrate it or not. You've probably all heard stories of how children will sometimes rebel or even just run away from home because they want independence and that independence isn't being given to them. What I have is the videography of depositions, and those are testimonies that people give as it relates to a certain lawsuit. And often those testimonies include a history of the person who might be wanting to sue somebody or who is being sued, and so the attorney will get the history of that person, and so often you'll hear a story, somebody's life story, summed up in 20, 30 minutes. Often that story isn't a happy story, and often I hear in those testimonies that their children have left the home because of circumstances in the home, and typically that circumstance is that we were too controlling. They didn't like the atmosphere. It was stifling. It was controlling. And the child felt they were oppressed, and the first chance they got, they ran away from home or they moved out of the house because they wanted their independence. And so I think it's a bit of a partnership or a dance where the child is trying to gain independence and they're trying to figure out what independence looks like at 10, 12, 13 on up till 18. And then the parent is trying to figure out, what does that independence look like? How much independence do you give to the child?
And I think the hard part as a parent is recognizing that the exerting of independence as a child becomes older can sometimes look like disrespect because they're pushing back on your authority in their lives. We don't think it's disrespectful when a child says, no, I'm going to brush my teeth myself. I'm going to go to the bathroom by myself. I'm going to feed myself. We just say, yay.
Yeah, that's true.
But when they get older and they're wanting to kind of push away our boundaries a little bit more and say, well, I want to make that decision myself, it sometimes is more threatening because it's usually more encompassing, more just about basic life stuff rather than just little behaviors.
Sometimes they're wanting to make decisions that you would just as soon continue to make on up until they leave the home because you like that control. You like to do things your way. You like to have things done your way. And giving a child independence means giving up the way things are done. If they're going to do it their own way, they're going to do it on their terms. You have to accept that.
It's especially difficult when you have the perspective, this is my home, and this is the one place where I should be able to have things go the way I want them to go. And you are my child, under my authority. So you need to do it the way I think you should do it. And while I think there's certainly room for that, I'm not saying that we should give up all authority. I am saying that there is a legitimate pushback, I think, that we're more uncomfortable with than what we like to admit.
Yeah.
And it has been challenging as I look at the ages of our kids. Okay, one of them is 7 and one of them is 15. So what level of independence is appropriate? Just recently, we told our older child that we felt she was old enough now to make decisions on what kinds of movies she could watch. We've talked to her all along about what we think is appropriate and why we didn't want her to watch certain movies, what's helpful, what's not helpful, what's going to put images in her mind that she'll never be able to forget that are inappropriate. So we did a lot of laying the groundwork, putting a foundation down that we hope she's going to make good decisions now based on those things. And it was interesting to me that even after we told her, we're giving you permission now to make those decisions yourself, she still frequently would check in with us. And I remember she was gone from home in a different state, and she called back and just said, so we were talking about watching this. Do you think that's a good movie for me to watch? And I was intrigued by that because I thought it was hard for me to let go of that and trust that she had good judgment. But it's ironic that when I finally let go, suddenly the pushing stopped.
Yeah,
and instead she came back and solicited our opinion.
Right. And that's the question that you wanted to hear was, what is your opinion? What do you think about this movie selection? It's not, can I watch this? Mm-hmm. She wasn't looking for a yes or no. You're just giving your opinion. And then based on that, she may or may not use that information, but she's collecting data, collecting information to decide for herself what's the best way to go.
Which is, I think, the kind of conversation that you are always aiming for. I mean, even after your children leave your home, you still hope that they cherish your thoughts, your opinions, and that they will ask. That they will come back and consult you when they're puzzled by something and they want to know something. It doesn't mean that they will follow what your advice is and what you think, but it does mean that they will still value it. I still want to be able to have those kinds of conversations when she's away from home.
Yeah. One of the things that I think help in nurturing a child's independence is answering the questions that they have about why they are supposed to do things. Why do I have to take the garbage out? Why has that task been given to me? Why do I have to go to bed at 9:30? Why can't I stay up as late as I want? Things like that. And rather than just saying, because I said so, because I'm the parent and you do what I say, I think it is important to answer those questions.
Well, part of what we're supposed to be doing is training our children how to become adults and how to think like adults. And it isn't something that just magically occurs when they turn 18. Oh, I now have the mind of an adult. So I think one way that we build that kind of thinking process is we explain. We talk to them. We tell them, here's why. And even though they may not like the decision, even though they may not even like our thinking process, they at least have an insight. Oh, okay, so you're thinking about those things. I'm thinking about totally different stuff, and I don't like what you're thinking about, but I do understand it at least. At one point, we took our oldest daughter's phone privileges away from her. She had a cell phone. And that was a really painful decision for her because she really loved the connection that she got with her cell phone. But because of some bad usage and some bad decisions on her part. Part of the consequence and part of the discipline was to take that privilege away. When we talked to her about consequences, we consulted her and asked, what do you think would be helpful for you? How could we help you make good choices? And that's when she said, well, I think I'm not ready for this. It's a little too much responsibility. But even if your child doesn't agree with you, still talking to them about it and explaining it at least makes them come to a conclusion that you are deciding this because you care about them, because you are thinking about who they are becoming, who they will be when they become a more grown-up person. And it doesn't just come across as a capricious, authoritative, because the end.
Right.
I have spoken. And I think sometimes we feel like we shouldn't have to explain ourselves. Our words should just be enough. And with little kids, that's probably true. Sometimes we get a little too caught up in explaining ourselves to 2-year-olds. They're incapable of even understanding that kind of dialogue. It's far too abstract. But by the time they get into their teen years, even I'd say 8 and 9, they can think far more abstractly than what we sometimes believe.
Yeah, and I think when you're in the process of trying to develop a child and to perhaps develop some filters that they can use, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. An example is trying to encourage who they choose as friends. You communicate that really the people that you hang out with have a lot of impact on the way you think and what your values are. So it's really important to develop friendships with people who have values that you respect, values that are consistent with your own to help support your own values. That doesn't always work. It doesn't always happen. And so they'll have friends that have different values. And so you have to decide, okay, am I just going to say, you can't be friends with that person because they don't have the same values or morals that our family has. Maybe you can say that for a child who's like 3 or 4. I don't know, perhaps you can. But when they become grade school and high school, again, I think you have to start giving over the independence to the child and say, well, here's what we have taught, here's the values that we think are important, but ultimately you have to decide who you're going to be friends with and where your support base is going to come from.
And it's actually a wonderful opportunity to come alongside them and just ask them questions. Like when the friend does something that is in absolute opposition to what you and your family believe in, just ask your child, what do you think of that? How does it make you feel? When your friend does this thing or talks like this, what goes on in your brain? And do you think it affects you? What do you want to do about it? Anything? And maybe nothing, but just teaching them to be a little more analytical and a little more thoughtful in the decisions that they make, even on just an everyday friend level. Am I going to listen to what my friend is saying, or am I not going to listen to it? And they can start doing that very, very young.
Right. Of course, I'm a dad with a 15-year-old girl who's quickly becoming 18, 21. So time goes by quickly, and so my issue is, what kind of boys are you going to date? I want to protect our daughter from any kind of harm. Mm-hmm. Anyone that would do harm to her physically or mentally or psychologically. Or emotionally. And so my basic instinct as a father, a protector, is that I'll just decide for you who you can date.
And how's that working for you?
Well, it doesn't work.
Yes.
So that's where the dialogue comes in. What values are important? And why are those values important to you?
Yeah, and I think we've had repeated conversations with her about, so what do you look for in a guy? What's important to you? And every once in a while, we'll point something out in a relationship that's very healthy, or we'll point something out and say, can you see how that is not a good thing? And she'll just tuck it away and then make a decision about it. But short of locking her up in a tower, there's not a whole lot that you can do about forbidding your child. You can't like this boy. You can forbid access, but the bottom line is they're going to leave your home someday. And we hope that when she leaves our home, she takes our values, she takes the standards that we have taught since childhood and adopts them and lives them out just in her regular life.
Yeah, and that's the reason we're having this conversation, and we wanted to put this up as a podcast, is because if you aren't having this kind of conversation with your child and beginning at 2 and on up until they become, adults, young adults, if you haven't been having that type of input, when the time comes, when they leave the home, where will they get that information and how will they make those decisions? They'll have to basically make it up as they go, or get that information from their peers or from the media or wherever. But it won't come from you as a parent if you haven't been involved in that process of slowly giving them more responsibility and more independence and helping them make decisions and letting them make decisions.
Another comment that same teacher made that I referred to at the beginning of the podcast was, he said, we always thought of our home as a launching pad. And I thought that was a good metaphor, that a lot of us, I think, see the home as a corral where we just have to keep those kids in the corral nice and safe from the predators. But if we begin to see that we are just nurturing these kids, teaching them how to leave the home and go out into the world and be functioning, good members of society who are capable of loving, who are capable of contributing, who are capable of appreciating others, encouraging others, and being happy, then we've been successful.
Yeah.
I tend to be more authoritative, and so it's hard for me to let go of authority. And as we have had a child being a teenager, I regularly find myself responding the same way I have always responded to something. She asks, can I do this? What do you think of that? And I immediately respond the same way I did when she was a young child. And I have to have a conversation with myself and say, you know what? She's not that age anymore. You are nurturing her to independence. So revisiting the way you discipline, the way you talk to your children, revisiting your guidelines. This is what we think you should do. This is what you think you shouldn't do. Recognizing that your child is constantly changing and is constantly growing. And so your response to them has to grow and change as well. And when I was a kid, we didn't even have to deal with the whole technology thing, which we've talked about in another podcast. And so our child, when she was 2, we didn't have to deal with technology much. But as she grew into her teen years, technology became a really significant thing. And we have to deal with that because that's part of our culture. It's what she's growing up in. And I think good parents have to really think on their feet and have to be constantly willing to change and not basically say, I have planted my flag here and it will never move.
Right.
It will always be here, because we are working for the relationship with our children. We want it to endure long past the time that they leave the home. We don't want to drive them from our home. We want to send them off with balloons and confetti and say, you can do it.
Right. And that's the important part of it, that if you've been nurturing that relationship and slowly giving things away and eventually giving them complete independence, rather than them having to fight for it and basically rip it from your hands, you have a good relationship with your child, and they often, I believe, will come back and look to you for wisdom, because they feel safe to do that. They don't feel like they're going to be criticized or be attacked because they weren't attacked when they were in the home. It was a safe place to experiment with making bad decisions.
Well, and what you're basically doing is building trust.
Yeah,
That
right.
you are saying to your children, I trust you now to be able to handle this. I couldn't trust you with it before because you were not mature enough.
Right.
You weren't you were not developmentally capable of dealing with it at this age. You are now. You have grown up enough that I trust you with this.
Yeah.
And sometimes you trust them and they let you down. And then it's all about forgiveness and offering a second chance after you've talked about, so why did that happen? How can we make sure it doesn't happen again? And then extending mercy and grace and saying, okay, we're going to give you another chance. But this time there are going to be a few more boundaries than normal.
Yeah.
And those boundaries will go away as you demonstrate that we can trust you again. But you do have to earn it back a little bit. Once it's earned back, we will give you trust. We will believe in you until you give us cause to think otherwise. And I was thinking about, so what are the areas that you work for independence? And one is financial, that our responsibility is to train our kids how to deal with money. And so even though we have a 7-year-old, we give her money, and sometimes she makes really good decisions and sometimes she makes really bad decisions. And at this point, the bad decisions don't really have any terrible consequences. But basically it's just, well, your money's all gone. So even though you want this other item, you can't get it because remember, you spent it back here.
Right. And really, you have to be prepared for that. And that's part of the process on behalf of the parent, is you're preparing for bad decisions to be made. Unless your child happens to be this financial wizard, they're going to make some bad financial decisions, and you can't protect them from that if you're going to truly give them independence.
Which is the main reason why you want to give them independence when they're young, because if they can make the bad decisions in a safe environment where the consequences are not going to really devastate their lives, and if they can learn some lessons from that they will then take into their adulthood. I'm not saying they're never going to make bad decisions in adulthood. They will, and they will suffer consequences. But they can learn some things in the safe environment by making small, bad judgment errors.
Right.
Then that will help them later on in life. So I was thinking finances. I was thinking, you mentioned the friendship thing, so the emotional independence, teaching them how do you make the choices of who you're going to open yourself up to, who you're going to be vulnerable to, that kind of thing. Independence, even in how they see themselves, self-esteem kind of stuff. I work pretty hard with both of our girls, trying to teach them that their beauty comes from who they are, from their personality, not from the fashion that they happen to be wearing at the time, not from their body shape, not from their hairstyle, not from the friends they hang out with, not from the cool car that they drive, not from anything external, but from the nurturing of their inner person. But I'd be stupid to believe that they're not influenced by those other things, because that is our culture.
Sure.
And so part of what I have been trying to let go of is recognizing that to a certain degree, my daughter buying clothes they're way more expensive, but she buys them just because they're the brand that everybody else is wearing.
Right.
That that's a choice that I need to let her make. If she wants to spend her money that way, it's nothing that's going to damage anything. It's not an immoral or unethical decision. But it's something that bothers me because I want to say, you don't have to look like everybody else. You don't have to wear the clothes that they wear. Just wear what you're comfortable in and what you like. But that's my view of her self-esteem.
Let me ask you this. This is a little bit of a sidebar, but do you think it's manipulative to have those conversations with your daughter? Let me give an example where, with regards to clothes, we go to the store and she's looking for a sweater, specifically a Nike sweater, and she says, "Oh, this is a great sweater, and it's only like $60." And so then I say, Nike spends a lot of money convincing you to spend a lot of money to have a Nike swoosh on that sweater. And you can actually spend half that amount of money if it doesn't have that Nike swoosh. It's still a very quality sweater, but you're going to save half of your money. And sometimes that's worked for her. She says, "Oh, and I can spend that money on something else, or I can get more stuff." Mm-hmm. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being a bit manipulative, though.
I don't think that's manipulative. You're just giving her information. I mean, everything that you're saying is absolutely true.
It's unsolicited.
Consumerism.
It's unsolicited information because she didn't start the conversation with, "Well, gee, Dad, what do you think?" I just jump right in there and say,
and I don't think you have to
here's
wait.
a spending tip.
I don't think you have to wait. Now, how you deal with it when she decides to spend that big amount on the Nike sweater.
That's true.
That's whether you become manipulative or not. And that's what I really have to work on, because I tell her she's free to make her own decisions with her clothing like that as long as it's modest. And I am the one who looks at it, and if I say, no, that's not modest, then she can't buy it. It doesn't matter how much it is. It doesn't matter how popular it is. That's the only standard that I have. But if she decides she wants to spend $80 on a sweater, and I think you could get the same thing for $15 without that little logo on it, it irks me to death. And I just so resent that she doesn't take my advice.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Well, and that's where you do have to plan to give that away.
Yes.
Plan to have that independence taken away.
Even if it bugs me.
Correct.
This is healthy. I'm allowing her, I have to truly allow her to make that decision and then not make her pay for it by being nasty to her afterwards and saying, "Well, I hope you're happy.
Right.
Look at that stupid decision that you made." That would be highly inappropriate. But the very immature part of me wants to do that.
That's true.
Because I do want to control her decisions when I feel like she's making a bad decision.
I think we also have to come to terms with the fact that Nike probably won't ever sponsor this podcast.
I think you're absolutely right. Another way of offering independence effectively to young children especially, although it works for older kids as well, is offering them choice. So whereas before you always made the decisions for them and you said you're going to do this now, you can begin to offer your kids choices when they do something, how they do it. And I was thinking specifically about our situation this summer. We have a 7-year-old, and she doesn't really have a schedule in the summertime, and we're not doing a lot of activities, like she doesn't have swim class or dance class. So she doesn't have a lot of structure. And left to her own devices, she will frequently just want to watch TV. And we're not in favor of her doing that nonstop. So instead of her having to ask every time, "Can I watch something?" and then us saying either yes or no, and then us also, if we say yes, then saying, "Well, you can only watch a half hour or you can watch a 1 hour," we have decided to give over some of that control to her. And basically we're going to make these little coupons that are worth a half hour's worth of television, and we'll give her a certain amount of those at the beginning of every week, and we'll tell her, when you use these up, your time is over. So if you want to use all of them the first day, that's fine. But then that means for the rest of the week, no television. And I feel like what this does is, first of all, it makes them responsible for their own habits. And second of all, they begin to realize that each one of their choices has consequences. And that it isn't just mom and dad being the bad guy saying, well, you can only watch a half hour today. But them recognizing that I'm the one who decided, and now I have to pay the consequence. So my own action brought on its own consequence. It isn't us being the bad guy, which I think is really great. And there are lots of other examples about how you can give choice. When we say there's a chore that needs to be done, I used to before structure it around my schedule, and I would say, okay, you need to do that right now. But I'm trying now more to give some choices and say, well, by the end of the day today, this needs to be done. And we're going to be doing this activity and this activity too, so you need to work around those things. If it's not done by the end of the day, then there has to be a consequence. So you give them a choice. You can decide when you're going to do it today. But if it's not done by the end of the day, by this deadline that I give you, then the consequence will be tomorrow you cannot go to your friend's house, whatever consequence you decide to impose on that. And then there's no angry at the end of the day. You just didn't do what I told you to do. It's just, oh, I'm really sorry. You knew what you needed to do. You chose not to do it. And the consequence is this is going to be the whatever, what will be taken away, or you won't be able to do this tomorrow. And while you're still in control and you're still in charge because you're the one setting up the parameters, you are giving an amount of freedom to your children as you allow them to make a few choices. And I think the only cautionary thing that I have to come to grips with when I'm doing this is the choices have to be real choices. And once in a while, I'll do one that's completely unfair. Well, you can either do this that I want you to do, or you can go to bed in the middle of the day. That's not a real choice. However, I think sometimes when I'm offering them a reward, like if I'm saying, well, we'll go to Limeberry, and if I want to say these other things need to be done first, I think it's perfectly legitimate at that point to say, well, do your chores and go to Limeberry, or don't do your chores and we don't go to Limeberry. And that's an ultimatum, but at the same time, I am giving them a true choice. Do you want to go to Limeberry? If you do, then it's a bit of a you give something to me, I give something to you sort of transaction. It's not just a freebie. And in that case, I think it's legitimate. But I do think that we need to be careful when it comes to choices, because we can sometimes just use them manipulatively to get what we want out of our kids, which sometimes I think is probably not appropriate. As far as other areas of offering independence, we talk about chores around the house. This is not a kind of independence that most kids seek for. They don't say, hey, I want to be independent. I want to learn how to take care of a home. But it is a level that we, I think, are responsible to train them in. And so even though we have a 7-year-old and she's not really capable of cleaning with any sort of thoroughness, we do have chores that she needs to do around the house, and that you don't get paid for it. It's just, in order for us to live in a home, we have to keep it clean, and we have to have some standard of neatness. And so everybody has to contribute, and you are part of the family, so you're going to contribute. And that's your level of responsibility. And she gets better at it the longer she does it. And sometimes if she does a real careless job, I'll just say, okay, you need to go back and do it again. And I will show her the areas that she was not highly responsible in and what it needs to look like when she's done. And the interesting thing is that after you establish kind of that pattern, And then you increase the load of responsibility and you give increased jobs. Okay, now that you're older, you need to do this. The complaining does reduce because they sort of just accept, okay, this is what it is to be part of a family. This is what it is to grow up. I'm teaching both of the girls on different levels how to cook because I feel like every human being should be able to cook for themselves, whether they're a male or a female. That when they leave the home, I don't want them to have to go out to eat all the time. It's way too expensive. I don't want them to have to go with fast food or packaged food at the grocery store. I want them to have the option to actually have real food and to cook it themselves. So each one of them is learning how to do different kinds of foods. And sometimes they want to make something and I think, oh, that's way too hard for you, or way too expensive, the ingredients, or it'll take too long. And I have to really back off and say, you know what? I told our older daughter, you're in charge of a meal. You pick out the recipe, I will provide the ingredients. So I can't back away and say, well, okay, that wasn't exactly. So if I am truly trying to teach her independence, I can't just treat her like a slave who is just doing my bidding.
Yeah.
That's responsibility. That's not.
No, and they'll figure that out real quick.
They will. And I sometimes give pseudo independence instead of true independence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very hard to stick by what you said and let them make decisions that you think, oh, I don't really want to go with that.
And you may have a child that will test that independence by purposefully making bad decisions just to see what you'll do. Did you really mean that? Are you really giving me that responsibility? That's where you'll be tested.
And that is challenging.
Yes.